This week on the Nonprofit News Feed, I am George Weiner, the chief whaler of Whole Whale, a B Corp digital agency focused on marketing and analytics for nonprofits. And we have Nick Azoulay, digital strategist at Whole Whale. We're both huge nonprofit geeks and love talking about the news and the implications on the sector. Nick, how's it going?
It's going great, George. How are you?
Doing well. I feel like our news feed goes from like, all right, what do we want to talk about? And I get to write some articles and talk about like historical issues. And then all of a sudden we are sort of awash with very interesting waves of information. And most notably jumping into it, like we had Bill Gates come out there with like, was that news or was that not news? So explain what the Gates Foundation just announced.
Yeah, George, I think this is newsworthy. Bill Gates last week made the announcement that the Gates Foundation, the largest American foundation by volume of assets, Gates announced that the foundation will permanently close at the end of December of 2045. So that's about 20 years from now, after more than 20 years of operation. This date, George, is much earlier than originally intended, and the foundation's going to spend down its entire endowment. And Gates estimates that he will be spending more than 200 billion in total over the next 20 years, particularly targeting the areas of health and human development. George, this foundation has established three clear goals for its next 20 years: preventable maternal and childhood deaths, a world without deadly infectious diseases, and helping to lift hundreds of millions more people out of poverty. So, George, obviously, this moment is not an accident. Gates acknowledged in an interview with the New York Times that this comes as the Trump administration has issued devastating cuts to America's foreign aid by eliminating USAID. That's 40% of global humanitarian funding, really. Gates acknowledged that that's going to lead to the additional millions of deaths of children. He believes that this is the time to go all in based on these gaps and wants to up their annual spending from $6 billion to $9 billion a year and not focus on preserving those funds. Like they're spending to spend. And he thinks that in this particular moment, with technology and progress, medical and scientific progress, we're able now to save lives for less. So, George, it seems that it was kind of this culmination of macro, political, and other economic factors that drove this decision. I think Gates was always potentially going to do this, but I think very few people thought it would happen at the intensity of now. And I think, George, it demonstrates, I don't know, a perspective that's maybe lacking in philanthropy, which the point of philanthropy is to spend money and potentially end. It's kind of radical for that world.
It's an excellent one. There was a telling quote from Gates's interview with Stephen Colbert where he in effect says, "You know what? I have to also acknowledge that there are going to be future billionaires that tackle the issues of the day. These are the issues of today, and they need to be dealt with now." And as he looked and explained that the cuts to USA, that the cuts to international vaccine programs were leading to not like hundreds of thousands, but millions per year of increased risks to children. He's like, the work is meant to be done now. Future billionaires are going to be out there. Future philanthropists are going to do that work. So this idea of like, I'm doing this for a legacy, I'm doing this to help the children of tomorrow. Like, no. There's like, there's a million kids. He's like, those kids should be alive next year, and I'm going to make sure that I deploy funds to do so. I also think that this, you can't attribute, but you can certainly point to the works of Mackenzie Scott saying, like, I'm not here to build a foundation that has assets that appreciate at a rate of 7 to 10% per year, exceeding that of the mandatory minimum of 5% distribution, which, by the way, that distribution can also include the foundation operational expenses, and to operate in perpetuity. I'm not here to create that. I'm here to deploy capital for the cause. And I'm going to do that at scale. So I think that might be catching on, which I kind of love.
Yeah, George, I think this is awesome. You know, it's like that TV show that knows when it's time to end. You know, they don't drag it on for another 10 seasons. You know, all the characters leave because they have new cushy jobs, and you get like some 3 episode per season disaster. This is a foundation that knows that now is the time. There was ever a time, it was now, knows what it's good at, and decided to go all in. And I think that that's quite frankly commendable and is a huge risk, by the way, for a philanthropic organization of this size. And I think something we're going to increasingly see, as you mentioned, we have Mackenzie Scott, even Melinda French Gates also working on her own philanthropic projects, really focusing on deploying capital as efficiently and as quickly as possible. It's radical and super cool and dire. It's needed.
Yeah, and so at that, accelerated payment schedule, it's 10 billion a year, probably more if you consider the fact that money is still gaining interest in the markets and they're going to be deploying that at, an increased rate there. So like in the past, I've seen sort of numbers around like, have they given maybe a little bit closer to like 7 billion? It oscillates year to year. I was trying to find an anchored number, and we'll get more into that next week. Little teaser when we've got actual foundation study of 1,600 foundations that are grant making institutions that we'll be talking about next week, putting it out there. But back to this, it is I think it is exciting, but also like 20 years is a very long time. And so if you're like, oh, tomorrow it's going to start raining, like, no. But that increased giving also, I think, signals a little bit. I want to go back to my this may be the echo of the Reagan era cuts that initially hurt, but then helped when the rest of the industry, corporations and foundations really stepped up. We had an explosion of nonprofits in the preceding years, a doubling of the sector after it was frankly so aggressively cut and attacked from funding standpoints in the 80s. So I think this is a reprisal of that. And these are the first signals that things are on the upswing.
Yeah, George, I think that's a correct assessment, right? When the pendulum swings too far to one side, we're always going to deviate back to the mean at a certain point. However, George, we still have a long ways to go.
More stuff.
Our next story comes in reporting from a whole host of sources, right? We're tracking the new tax portion of the House budget bill. So, George, this bill is titled, I'm not even kidding, the One Big Beautiful Bill. It says it in the fancy letters on the PDF. And importantly, George, we want to track one provision that will be deja vu for listeners to this podcast, and that is the introduction of a provision similar to HR 9495, which, if you remember, last December, tried to create a process that would, in essence, remove due process from the Treasury Department's ability to remove the tax-exempt 501c3 status of nonprofits. So this provision grants broad powers to the executive branch, again, specifically the Department of the Treasury, to revoke the tax-exempt status. And the National Council of Nonprofits claims that this will not require full transparency, any kind of substantive evidence, or sufficient due process. So, George, needless to say, it's opening up a tremendous opportunity for abuse here. And in particular, George, the bill uses similar language as HR 9495 last year, which is around nonprofit support for terrorism. And I think at the time, George, we didn't necessarily fully know how that language would be operationalized by this current administration. But I think in the fights over immigration policy, in which the White House is invoking the Alien Enemies Act, a law that has not been invoked since the internment of Japanese Americans, to basically remove immigrants from the United States without due process. That is their legal reasoning. The national security and terrorism language creates the legal permission structure, I think, for them to begin their harassment. And this is what they're trying to do, right? And same with universities, right? You know, Harvard, because of protests, supports terrorism, XYZ. Now in paper, you say, if a university, by the way, a tax-exempt organization, supports terrorism, they can have their status revoked. And there's very little due process there. There is a process, there is an appeal process through the IRS, but even if that appeal happens, right, the median blowback could be significant, particularly for organizations at the size of major university foundation, et cetera. So, George, this bill has actually left the Ways and Means Committee. We just researched this before the call. It's left the Ways and Means Committee. It is now on its way to the House Budget Committee, where it's going to be amalgamated with the other provisions in the budget and sent eventually to a floor vote. We're just kind of looking at the tax portion of this. George, what does this mean for nonprofits, and why is it so existential, and why is this so dangerous and potentially enabling of executive abuse?
Yeah, you mapped it out perfectly, and the words are due process. You are seeing this as the common thread that you can pull, and specifically it is around the removal of due process from deporting immigrants, the removal of due process, pulling the courts out of the way, pulling proper examination of an issue out of the way and consolidating power in the executive side to basically follow and continue this tour of retribution unabated by any conversation or, the underpinnings of, frankly, our Constitution, which is in and around checks, balances, and due process. It's one of those big things we signed up for. We didn't want the monarchy. Getting back to the specifics, though, we have written articles, we have had conversations around what happens if your 501c3 status gets canceled. And it's not an accident that HR bill didn't get passed. It got stopped. Now it's being bundled. We called it a poison pill back then. It's basically like a zombie provision now, like back from the dead, and for good reason, because it gives tremendous power to attack their enemies in an expedited way that is very, very disruptive, if not ruinous, for many nonprofits. And so adding that sort of in this bundle is all manner of sin can be hidden in these large bills that are forced down the throats of folks. Not smart enough to understand if it's going to go through, but I think it would be very prudent for you, if you are in an organization or you're like law firms, you're like really planning out the what happens when our C3 gets canceled, doing that search, getting a better understanding, coming up with plans, appeals, whatever it may be. There's a lot of roads that you can take, but that could be something that they do en masse.
Yeah, George, I hear you there. And I think in particular, unfortunately, if you work in the cause verticals of immigration or anything having to do with gender, LGBTQ rights, you kind of know the greatest hits of the things the current administration does not like about the quote, woke left nonprofit sector. If you fall into that, I think you now need to be paying attention and create contingency plans for what happens if the IRS becomes weaponized and they come for you. And I think, George, we're already seeing that. All the momentum is towards harassing nonprofits. Most prominently, I think right now, universities, but I think we'll continue to talk about, foundations, local nonprofits, advocacy groups, particularly anything dealing with kind of foreign affairs or hot button political issues. We need to be looking at this closely.
Yeah. And as a reminder, they're doing this because that work matters. That work has a real impact, and that work pisses them off when you help people. Keep doing that work.
Absolutely. All right, George. So also unpacking this bill, says our policy heavy podcast for today. We read in Politico last week, they got a scoop really that we're going to start to see taxes on income from large endowments, particularly in foundations.
So this wasn't part of the big, beautiful bill. I thought this was rolled into there. This is like a separate ride along.
This is part of the big, beautiful bill, George.
Okay,
however,
it's just so big that
it got packaged in. And quite frankly, George, before the podcast, I used AI to kind of scan the bill, find the part, it's like 400 pages, find the part that talks about these foundation provisions and kind of outlined it. So if you scroll to page 283, section 112022, titled Increase in Rate of Tax on Net Investments Income of Certain Private Foundations, you will see that basically they want to add investment income tax on foundations with a particular target of foundations making mucho moolah. Okay, so if you're a foundation
over
making
$1 billion, 10%, right?
Yes. Well, actually, 50 million. If you have assets up to 50 million, it's 1.39%. 250 million, 2.78%. 5 billion, 5%, and 10 billion, 10%.
Yeah,
or I'm sorry, more than 5 billion, 10%. Yeah.
Okay. More than. More than attendance. Pretty, you know, I had the thought, I've been thinking about it because like sometimes I'm a skeptic of, foundations, as like I quoted before, like the fact that the minimum distribution amount is 5%, yet markets appreciate at 7 to 10%, depending on how you're deploying your capital. You're like, okay, so you have this like self-perpetuating growing thing. Like that is something that exists tax-free under our system. However, I don't think the solution to that is like to take money back, because the whole point, just follow back, right? The foundation, the 501c3 exists because somebody gave tax free, a donation saying, hey, here's my money. I'm going to deploy it into the world, not to get retaxed back into the government, back into the system, right? Like just follow the logic. Like that money went that way for a reason and was tax free because of its intent to help local, global, societal issues that people are voting with their dollars. Those are votes. I vote my dollars into a nonprofit to say, go do that good in the world. And I get a tax advantage. I get a tax deduction for that because it's not supposed to be taxed. So suddenly bringing this up kind of like did a thing for obviously the point of going after universities, right? And also private foundations that rhyme with, I don't know, lates and mates. The other piece, though, is like the thing that I kind of wish is that actually they looked at the distribution amount. Like that would have been incredible. Like, hey, like just bump the distribution amount up, that you have to just deploy more capital. But that's not what they're trying to do, right? Like think about their intent. They're literally trying to harm them, not create a better system for philanthropy or to like encourage the deployment of funds. They're just like, if anything, it'll cause them like not to want to sell or to like wait them out for 4 years, because if that went through, all of that would be taxed at a 10% rate, which is actually, potentially pretty high for the gains some of these folks have.
Yeah, George, I think you bring up a good point, right? And listen, I attend Columbia University. Columbia University is the largest private landowner in New York City. And guess who doesn't pay taxes on that on that property, right? It creates real equity issues, right? And Columbia's history is so intertwined with its tense relationship with among the poorest communities in New York City, Harlem. And I think just as we talk about, hospitals needing to, as part of their tax incentives, provide for the community, I think there's logic to be had in thinking about ways we can better ensure that universities or foundations are really dispersing what they need to and providing the social benefit to the communities that they serve. But per your point, this is not the way to do that, right? This is tax harm to foundations to pay for rich people getting tax cuts, right? That's what this is. And I think you hit the nail on the head. So we'll kind of see what happens here, but could be potentially meaningful, particularly for organizations of a certain size. All right, George, that's enough policy for now. I need to feel good. This one comes from WTOP, and it's about a nonprofit called A New Inspired Change, which hosted its 15th annual Pamper Party for nearly 200 women in the DC and Maryland DMV area, struggling with homelessness, addiction, and other hardships. And they provide manicures, haircuts, clothing essentials, and a supportive community. And this event was founded by Portia Everett and grew from a small picnic to a significant celebration with the theme, She Rocks a New Seed, recognizing that motherhood doesn't end because of hardships. So, George, Mother's Day, just this past weekend, shout out to all the awesome moms out there. I know my mom doesn't listen to this podcast, so she won't get that message, but in spirit,
My mom does.
shout out from me to her.
Happy Mother's Day. Hope you like the vase.
Oh gosh, happy Mother's Day. All right, George, I think you have a joke for me.
I do. I have a joke. And actually, it is around moms. And specifically, how do moms at the Space Foundation get babies to sleep?
I do not know.
They rocket.
Okay. Like a rocking chair?
No, like a rocket ship. You send the baby like on a rocket and you just Elon that little bugger into space because you are tired and you are a mom. Off to space with you.
Shout out to the Katy Perry fans, huh? Oh, all right. Thanks, George.
Thanks, Nick.